Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Counterfactual Gaming, the gaming channel where if there's something historical to do in a video game, we don't do it. And today I'm grinding towards the city of Kazan because I want to talk about optimizing the least important piece of equipment in Hearts of Iron, the humble infantry kit. Because while the infantry kit isn't the most important piece of equipment in Hearts of Iron, a failure to optimize infantry kits can drag down the rest of your production. I mean, after all, look at all the factories I've got on infantry kits just for this run as Germany right now. Yeah, you want to optimize it so that you don't have to put 5,000 factories on infantry kits and can actually build things like tanks and planes. But before we talk about optimization strategies for infantry kits, we need to understand a couple of sort of basic pieces of information about infantry kits. And there's what I consider to be three relevant facts about infantry kits that you need to know before we even talk about producing them. You need to know that the infantry kit stats do not matter for garrisons, infantry kit stats do not matter for intelligence operations, and the support weapons techs do not cost equipment or increase the cost of kits. Now, what do I mean by infantry kit stats do not matter for garrisons? Well, it's very simple. There isn't a stat on infantry kits that makes garrisons better. There are battalion types that are better for garrisons. You get more suppression out of cavalry, for example. But the stats of the infantry kits being used don't matter. Now, I know someone's saying, but wait a minute, the stats on armored cars and tanks are better for garrisons. And you're not wrong. But infantry kits don't have hardness, so the advantages that things like armored cars or tanks might have in garrisons don't apply to infantry kits. It doesn't matter what kits your garrisons have, they will suppress when on garrison duty the exact same way. For intelligence operations, it's the same. The stats don't matter. If I start an intelligence operation to support resistance in Krakow, I can send Tier 0 kits I stole from the Chinese and give those to the freedom fighters in Poland, and they will kill just as many occupying Germans as they would if I sent them Tier 3 kits. When I'm talking about support weapon techs, I'm talking about this line of techs up here. All of these support weapon techs boost specific stats on infantry kits, but they don't cost you anything. So, like, if I grab, the Tier 3 support weapons techs, you can see it adds both defense and breakthrough to all of those battalion types. It adds defense and breakthrough to Cav, and it adds defense and breakthrough to special forces as well. And you notice it's a percent increase, it's not an absolute value increase. I bring that up because if we take a look at the value of infantry kits, you can see that defense is one of the most important stats infantry kits have. So a percent boost to defense is actually really good, even if you don't have the best infantry kits, because infantry kits have solid defense stats. That breakthrough boost, not nearly as important, but hey, it's still free, right? And I bring all of this up because the temptation most players have, even when running concentrated industry, is research better infantry kit, and then immediately swap your production lines over. But I'm going to argue that that is not necessarily the best approach to take if you are using concentrated industry. Let's take a brief look at what it costs to use better infantry kits. If we look at the screenshot here I've got my Tier 0 kit, my Tier 1 kit, Tier 2 kit, and the Tier 3 kit. They're not listed in order because the game doesn't list them in order in the UI. So Tier 0 is at the top, and then it goes from Tier 3 to Tier 2 to Tier 1. Don't ask me why. You'll notice that the cost steadily increases for each type of infantry kit, but also once we get past Tier 1, we pay more steel per infantry kit. Now, for a lot of countries, that probably doesn't matter. If you're playing Germany, the Soviets, the US, France, Britain, even as Brazil, at one point I had enough steel to manufacture a decent number of Tier 3 kits. The steel cost may not matter, but if you are playing a country that has a shortage of steel, it's not necessarily economically viable to immediately switch over to a better infantry kit. So if we consult with Vatuten, he's going to tell us that each tier of infantry kit costs roughly between 16 to 18% more than the previous production cost. And of course, the tier 2 and tier 3 kits require significantly more steel. That is not an insubstantial cost increase for that equipment. Whether you can afford the steel or not is going to be highly context specific. The outright production cost increased is a whole other ballgame. And what do you get for that increase in cost and steel? Well, I've taken a single infantry battalion in the division designer and set it up with tier 0, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 kits. So you can see the stat differences between each kind of kit. And if you look at this, you'll notice immediately a couple of interesting things. One, defense stats are, of course, the best stat that infantry kits have. Two, you'll notice that the tier 0 kit is garbage. It is absolute garbage. It has rotten piercing. It has half the soft attack and half the hard attack of the tier 1 kit. You'll notice that the tier 3 kit actually has fairly decent piercing compared to all the other kits. And you'll also notice that when we get to tier 3, reliability takes a hit. Now, looking at these stats, it should be clear that the tier 0 kit is terrible. You should only be making tier 0 kits if you don't have tier 1 kits. Yes, the defense value is okay, but all of the other values are so bad, given the cost of the kit and not just the production cost, but the steel cost of the tier 0 kit. You have to ask yourself why you would deliberately make those if you had no other choice. And a lot of countries start with a tier 1 kit, so there's nothing to be gained by trying to make some kind of super cheap kit in most cases. But if we look at the tier 1, the tier 2, and the tier 3 kit, you see that you are paying more in both resources and production costs to get significant increases in stats. The question you have to ask yourself is, do you care enough about those stat increases to make it worth swapping production lines over? And here's what I mean about swapping production lines over. Here I've got 3 production lines set up. I've got a tier 1, a tier 2, and a tier 3 production line running right here on screen for you to look at. And I want you to see how much production efficiency I lose by swapping that tier 1 kit to a tier 3 production line. Okay. Look at how low our production becomes the moment we make that change. Why does this matter? Well, I mean, everyone watching this video already knows that when you're concentrated industry, you take a big hit to your output every time you swap a production line over. But, as I've said before, infantry kits are one of those pieces of equipment that you can generally produce from day one. So unlike Panzer IVs or Panthers or Spitfires or B-29s, tier 1 infantry kits, you can get those started from day one, and you can just let those production lines run forever and generate tons of infantry kits, reducing your need to throw lots of extra factories on the production line. You just don't need to. And when you realize the stats on the infantry kits are agnostic to certain game mechanics, you might say to yourself, well, I'm going to be using cavalry for suppression, so the tier 1 kits that are in the cavalry, that's fine. It doesn't matter if they have low stats. Or I'm going to shovel 50,000 infantry kits to Poland to boost resistance against the Germans. I don't need tier 2 kits for that, or tier 3 kits for that. I can just print off more tier 1 kits. So it seems like I might be advocating that upgrading production lines to better infantry kits is not the best idea. But how much of an impact does that production line change make in the long term? I mean, right here, you're just seeing the effects on day one of swapping a production line over. What does it look like in terms of 6 months, a year? Well, luckily for you, I measured it. So what I did is I created a Soviet save. I gave the Soviets some of their focuses in the focus tree, and I went to 1941 techs all across the board, concentrated. And I set up 3 production lines of tier 1 kits, 15 factories each. Let them go up to maximum production efficiency. And then I turned one production line into a tier 2 line and another production line to a tier 3 line, as you can see here. And then I deleted all of the Red Army, I deleted all of the infantry kits out of the stockpile, and I let the production lines run until the tier 2 line and the tier 3 line reached maximum production efficiency. So let's take a look at what kinds of kits we produced. In the time it took to get the tier 2 and tier 3 production lines up to full speed under Concentrated Industry 1941, the tier 1 production line built 131,000 infantry kits. The tier 2 production line built 82,000 infantry kits, and the tier 3 production line built only 65,000 infantry kits. Now, if we look at those numbers, that tells us that the tier 1 production line produced 59% more infantry kits than the tier 2 production line in the same period. And the tier 1 production line produced twice as many infantry kits as the tier 3 line in the time it took to get those production lines up to full speed. That is not an insubstantial difference. Just as a reminder, each battalion of infantry requires 100 kits. So back of the envelope map tells us that the tier 1 kit production line produced enough kits to outfit 490 extra infantry battalions compared to the tier 2 production line. And the tier 1 production line produced 658 battalions of infantry kits compared to the tier 3 line in the same period. So I have 3 basic pieces of advice for anyone running Concentrated Industry who want to optimize infantry kit production. And these strategies are somewhat interchangeable. You can combine them, you can pick one in one game and do something differently in another game based on context. But all 3 of these strategies should allow you to optimize your infantry kit production so you can divert factory output to more valuable equipment. Strategy 1, just make tier 1 kits. Yeah, I know that doesn't sound very bright, but if you're thinking to yourself, I just need infantry kits to outfit infantry divisions, and I'm going to do most of the heavy lifting with planes and tanks, maybe you don't even need tier 2 or tier 3 kits. Just keep the tier 1 production lines running from day 1 and just ignore them. Don't even look at them. Don't even worry about MEOs. You just see no evil, hear no evil. I don't even know there are other infantry kits you can produce. We just make tier 1 kits. Strat number 2 is, of course, you research the tier 2 kit and the tier 3 kit, but you don't bother swapping to the tier 2 kit. You just swap to the tier 3 kits when you get to that technological point. Instead of taking an extra hit to production efficiency by doing the tier 2 kit, you just keep cranking out tier 1 kits till you finally get around to the tier 3 kit. Then you put the tier 3 kit into production. This strategy assumes that you're stockpiling extra kits in anticipation of production lag when you make the new production lines. Strat 3, of course, is to stagger production line swaps. And here's what I mean by that. When I say stagger production lines, what I mean is you have 2 different production lines with tier 1 kits. They don't have to be 15 factories. They can be set up however you want, but we're just using 15 factory on each production line as an example here. So what you do is when you research the tier 2 kit, you take one of these production lines, doesn't matter which one, you swap it over. You leave the other production line intact and running, and then you just let this production line get all the way up to maximum production efficiency. When you get the tier 3 kit, you take the tier 1 line that you left running by itself earlier, you swap that over. By the time you get to the tier 3 kit, this tier 2 kit production line should be close or at full speed. You let it stay that way until the tier 3 kit is fully up to speed. Then you swap over the remaining tier 2 kit over to tier 3. That way you always have at least one production line running at full speed, even if it's cranking out weaker kits, so that you can keep numbers up. But I have a breaking news report. A bunch of viewers are yelling at the screen the words Dispersed Industry. What about Dispersed Industry? That's actually a really good question. You should be yelling that at the screen. Let's talk about Dispersed Industry. So I reran the test with Dispersed Industry. Again, 1941 text across the board, but we're now doing dispersed instead of concentrated. Same other stuff. And I did the same thing where I deleted the Red Army, deleted the stockpile, ran the production lines to full, then swapped one to tier 2, swapped one to tier 3, ran them to full again, and saw what I could produce. And if we take a look at the stockpile, you see something very different. 82,000 tier 1 kits, 60,000 tier 2 kits, and 48,000 tier 3 kits. The difference in production between the three lines is much smaller than it is with concentrated industry, as we would expect. I mean, that's one of the advantages of Dispersed. It should let you swap your production lines around more often. But these changes to the numbers change the advice that I would give to you. If you are using Dispersed industry, go ahead and swap your lines over. As long as you are ahead in infantry kits, you're not losing nearly as much by swapping production lines over. Now, do keep in mind, the concentrated industry production lines, when at full production efficiency, crank out more equipment in total. So if you're dispersed, you're just not going to make as many infantry kits per factory as concentrated is. That's just not how it works. But because dispersed has better retention and a better production efficiency base, there's no reason you can't leverage that to just swap your production lines over right away and get the better kits out there. Now, having said all of that, I would be remiss if I didn't address this issue. Some people have asked me, is it worth it to make a tiny production line for tier 0 kits just for garrisons, since garrisons don't care about the stats on the kit? And my advice is no. If you've got the tier 1 tech, just make those. There are also a few other pieces of information worth keeping in mind that don't fit anywhere else in this discussion, but they're worth just having in your brain as you optimize factory output. It's worth importing tungsten or steel to make tanks or artillery, but if you have to import steel for better infantry kits, don't bother. Just make tier 1 kits. Of course, you should always be prioritizing your better kits for special forces and panzers. And something to always keep in mind is that mechanized infantry needs infantry kits and mechanized to be good, but the stats you probably care about are derived from the mechanized part, not necessarily from the infantry kit part. So don't try and waste time making better infantry kits if it's coming at the cost of mechanized tanks or planes. I'd rather have more mechanized battalions with tier 1 kits than fewer mechanized battalions with tier 2 kits. And I think that about wraps up this episode. Taking a look at the statistics on the last poll I posted, it seems clear to me that a lot of folks might disagree with some of the things I have to say in this video, and that's okay. If you've got a complaint, question, comment, throw it down in the comment section down below, and I'll be sure to get back to you. I won't have an explanation for why Japan is allying with Iraq, but I can at least try to explain something I talked about in this video. I also wanted to send a shout out to all the channel members who've been keeping this channel alive. Much more alive than the Italian-German technology treaty at any rate. I'm not sure what we're going to be doing next time. I've actually been playing some Victoria 3 and I have some thoughts about it. The word cope keeps coming up in my thoughts, and I might dig down into that. Who knows? But until then, I hope that you all having a pleasant day, and I will see you later.